10 years after her brother died in a hiking accident, Melissa was sitting in a movie theater when a scene unexpectedly reminded her of him. To her surprise, she began to sob uncontrollably. Until that moment, she thought that she had processed her grief. At the time of his death, she had been managing a demanding job and caring for their aging parents. She never gave herself the space for grieving. But now, years later, the grief came rushing in, raw, unfamiliar, and as painful as if it had just happened. This was delayed grief, arriving in its own time, uninvited but very real. Welcome to this mini-series on understanding the language of grief, loss and trauma. My name is Nathalie Himmelrich. I'm a somatic practitioner, psychological therapist, educator and author, specializing in grief and trauma, and the host of the How to Deal with Grief and Trauma podcast. Grief and trauma are deeply human experiences, yet many of us struggle to describe what we are going through or to understand what others are facing. The vocabulary of loss is vast, varied, and sometimes overwhelming. In this short podcast episode series, we'll explore the different types of grief, loss, and trauma that people encounter throughout life. Each mini-episode serves both as an educational tool and a compassionate companion for anyone trying to make sense of their own experience with grief, loss, and trauma, or someone who is supporting someone else who is. These terms are more than labels. They are doorways into greater understanding, healing, and connection. Whether you are a bereaved parent, a caregiver, a therapist, or someone walking alongside a grieving friend or someone who has experienced trauma, these bite-sized episodes aim to give you language, insight, and tools. Each one includes a definition, some key considerations, an explanation of why it matters, relevant podcast episodes, and frequently asked questions that I have been asked by my clients and you, the listener of the podcast. And my answers are all grounded in both professional and lived experience. So let's begin. Delayed grief refers to grief that is postponed, often unconsciously, and it will resurface well after the initial loss. It may emerge months or even years later, often triggered by reminders, anniversaries, or even unrelated loss or a related new loss. The grief that once was buried and set aside returns to be felt and processed. So delayed grief is not a sign that someone didn't love the person they lost. More often, it is a result of suppression, distraction, or survival mode, or a lack of support when the loss initially occurred. Sometimes people feel obligated to stay strong for others, or they were overwhelmed by other life demands at the time. So when delayed grief resurfaces or surfaces, it can feel confusing and overwhelming, especially if people assume they had already moved on. So recognizing delayed grief helps normalize a range of emotional timelines, because grief does not always follow a linear path. And feelings may emerge when we least expect them. This understanding can reduce guilt or self-judgment and encourage compassionate responses from both the griever and their support network. It also reinforces the idea that healing is not about getting over a loss. It's about giving space for emotions to arise when they are ready. As part of conversations of more recent losses, quite a few of my interviewees reflected on historical losses, realizing that they didn't fully grieve them. Only in retrospect, with that more recent loss, they could actually see that failure of grieving or grieving fully. Future discussions may include stories of grief emerging years later, mental health professionals on the impact of unresolved grief, and advice for navigating emotional triggers long after the initial loss. So I'm looking forward to those conversations. A question I received, the first one is, why is my grief showing up now, years later? And I love this answer because life may have just created space for it, emotionally or practically. So sometimes a similar loss or a milestone or a period of quiet reflection can open the door to what was once held back. Does this mean I didn't grieve properly the first time? Not at all. You may have processed some aspects and simply weren't ready to feel others. Delayed grief is a continuation, not a failure. So what does delayed grief look like? It can show up as sudden sadness, anger, insomnia, anxiety, or longing, often triggered by anniversaries, new losses, or emotional memories. Sometimes the reaction feels stronger than expected. And a colleague of mine recently asked me, how can I support someone going through delayed grief? So it's important to not question the timing, validating their emotions, and avoid saying, that was such a long time ago. Because as you know and I know, grief has no expiration date. So can therapy help with delayed grief? Of course, yes. A grief-informed therapist can help explore unresolved feelings and create space for healing, even years after the loss has occurred. So it is never too late. In the next episode, I'll be speaking about absent grief. Stay tuned. I hope this episode has helped you feel more grounded in the language of loss, grief, or trauma, and maybe even offered you some clarity, validation, or insight into your own experience or the experience of someone you care about. Grief and trauma are deeply personal, yet universal. When we can name what we're feeling, we take one powerful step closer to healing and the integration of our experience back into our life. If this series resonates with you, I invite you to keep exploring. You'll find more resources, courses, and ways to work with me at nathaliehimmelrich.com. And of course, you're always welcome to revisit any of the episodes whenever you need a gentle reminder that you're not alone. Until next time, take good care of your heart.